I'm here now with Executive Director Anthony Poore. Anthony, can you tell me a little bit about the work that New Hampshire Humanities does?
Sure. New Hampshire Humanities is one of 58 organizations across the United States. We've been operating in New Hampshire for 44 years. And over the course of those 44 years, we've acted as both a convener, a funder, and a catalyst for lifelong learning. In terms of our current programming that's offered, we have our Humanities to Go program, which the majority of your audience is familiar with. And we offer 475 programs free of charge across the entire state of New Hampshire. Second of all is our Connections program, which is our work with our ESL, or English as Second Language providers, and our ABL providers. We provide support materials to them. Third is we have our community project grants, where we provide grants for local nonprofits who want to bring in cultural activities into their home communities. And lastly, we have our special projects. And that's been our work with the veterans, in particular our Dialogue on War series. And most recently, which I'm really excited to launch, is our new Ideas on Tap, where we're bringing newer and more relevant issues to the table in a more, what I'll call, a relaxed atmosphere.
So tonight is your first annual dinner. Can you tell me a little bit about how it's going?
It's going great. I'm super excited. I mean, obviously I'm nervous. We have over 600 people here who are come together to celebrate the humanities and all it does. I'm particularly excited because we have Susan Stamberg here this evening, who's really the mother of National Public Radio, and she's going to share her talk, 1,000 hours of talk, with those in attendance. So when I think about her as being catalyst for change, I like to believe that New Hampshire Humanities is similar in that respect.
Can you tell me a little bit more about Susan Stamberg?
Sure. I mean, obviously she's the mother of modern, what I'll call, public radio, particularly in the talk experience. You can't think of many women who really took it on and as she's done in the past. And now, I mean, through her books and through the work that she's doing, she's just continued to lead women, particularly in the field of journalism and just a number of different ways. And so, again, for us, she represents all that we aspire to be. And those are folks who ask the tough questions, dream big, and really, coalesce around ideas.
Thank you for believing in and supporting the humanities. Now it's time for our keynote address. We are so grateful to our lead sponsor, Dartmouth College, and are excited to have such a strong partner in our work to promote the humanities in New Hampshire. I would like to I would like to welcome Dr. Graziella Peretti. Don't you love her name? Graziella was originally an immigrant from Milano, Italy, and then a professor, and now is the director of the Leslie Center for the Humanities at Dartmouth College. And I'm happy to say, a New Hampshire Humanities board member. She will introduce our keynote speaker. Graziella.
So I have managed to have laryngitis for tonight. But this is also the best radio voice that I will ever have in my life. It almost feels unnecessary to introduce Susan Stamberg to this audience, but I will do my best to recap her wonderful career, and I think that I'm speaking for everybody by saying that she will not be allowed to retire ever. We want her on the radio forever. Susan Stamberg is a nationally and internationally renowned broadcast journalist, and sometimes technology is fantastic because wherever I travel, whether it is in Australia or Europe, I can listen to her on the computer. It's fantastic. And I do not embrace technology all the time. So she is a nationally and internationally renowned broadcast journalist and a special correspondent for NPR. A native of New York City, Stamberg is a graduate of Barnard College and has been awarded numerous honorary degrees, including a Doctor of Humane Letters from Dartmouth College. I have to mention that, as I am from Dartmouth. She is a fellow of Silliman College, Yale University, and has served on the boards of the Penn-Faulkner Fiction Award Foundation and the National Arts Journalism Program based at Columbia University's Graduate School of Journalism. She's a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Stamberg is the first woman to anchor a national nightly news program and has won every major award in broadcasting. So I'm particularly delighted that she has joined us in Manchester, New Hampshire tonight. She has been inducted into the Broadcasting Hall of Fame and the Radio Hall of Fame. An NPR founding mother, Stamberg has been on staff since the network began in 1971. Stamberg served as co-host of NPR's award-winning news magazine, All Things Considered, for 14 years. She started when she was 10. She then hosted Weekend Edition Sunday and now reports on cultural issues for Morning Edition and Weekend Edition Saturday. Susan, please make an effort to give us some good news during broadcast. One of the most popular broadcasters in public radio, Stamberg is well known for her conversational style, intelligence, and knack for finding interesting stories. Her thousands of interviews include conversations with Laura Bush, Billy Crystal, Rosa Parks, Dave Brubeck, and an Italian, Luciano Pavarotti. Prior to joining NPR, she served as producer, program director, and general manager of NPR member station WAMU-FM, Washington, D.C. She is the author of 2 books, and she co-edited a third. The first book is Talk, NPR's Susan Stamberg Considers All Things. The chronicles of 2 decades with NPR. And another book, Every Night at 5, Susan Stamberg's All Nights Considered book, that was published in 1982 by Pantheon. Stamberg also co-edited The Wedding Cake in the Middle of the Road, published in 1992 by Norton. I absolutely adore this book, and you'll know why in a minute. Presented to 23 writers, the challenging idea for this book was to create a short stories suitable for radio, incorporating the image of a wedding cake in the middle of the road. So you have to keep a piece of the cake tonight and find a way somehow to take it to the middle of some road somewhere in New Hampshire. The plots of the short stories include a bride and a groom with their shoes covered with frosting, a dumping ground for plastic wedding cakes, and I quote, "the prettiest place plastic ever made," a groom removed by crows from a wedding cake. The issues in the short story is to bring the cake to a road. For example, a delivery man is attacked by a dog and drops the cake. A couple happen upon a stopped delivery van and steal a slice of the cake inside. An infatuated man forms a cake snow sculpture in the middle of a western trail. A photographer sets a cake down in the middle of the road for the sake of taking a particularly engaging shot. A drunken and romantically depressed young man sets a cake down in order to watch it get run over. A mysterious woman in a pickup drops it out of her window as a means to catch the protagonist's attention, etc., etc. So now is your duty tonight to find additional plots. And talking about food, my colleague Andrea Tarnowski, who is the Associate Director of the Humanities Center at Dartmouth, she's sitting over there, asked me to thank Susan Stamberg for her annual Thanksgiving sharing on NPR. of a cranberry relish recipe that looks like, and I quote her, a Pepto-Bismol dish, but tastes terrific, she says. So join me in welcoming Susan Stamberg.
I knew somebody would mention that recipe, but I thought it might come later. Thank you for the terrific introduction and for having me here. This has been just a grand time for me. The work that you do is extraordinary. Somebody gave me a catalog today of all the various events and talks and activities associated with this organization. And honestly, if I lived here, and it made me want to, I think I would find something to do every day, because you're just so busy, and you're so busy doing good in good places. So I have to get out my spontaneous ad-libs. And I'm really happy to be invited. The last time, I looked it up in my records, the last time I was in New Hampshire, I've been here several times in different places, but the last time was to Gilmanton. Who here has been to Gilmanton? Really? Why? Well, I had a good excuse. I was doing, of course, a story on Peyton Place. This was, I think it was around 1995, it was a while ago. And they had just, it was the anniversary of the book. I think it came out in '55, did it? I was a mere child then, but read every page, especially the good parts, as those of my generation and succeeding generations tended to do. So we went up there, a producer and an engineer and I, and we had just a grand time. We found people who all claimed to have been Grace Metalius's best friend. Of course, I don't think anyone knew her, but nonetheless. And we went into the library. This was the most interesting part to me. And they did not have a copy of Peyton Place. And I was shocked, I tell you. But I had a copy, I brought it along. And I got the librarian to read the first page of it. Indian Summer is like a woman, I can't do it for you. But I was just looking at it the other day, getting ready to talk to you. And she, you know, there were all these rumors that she hadn't written it because she wasn't educated. But whoever wrote it, and I believe she did, was some writer. I mean, those opening paragraphs are wonderful, and the plot really sizzles. Of course, it looks so tame now. I mean, if you went back to try to read that book, it'd be like a Bible. I think God just punished me for saying that. Anyway, I gave the title of this speech some time ago, months ago, and I picked a very safe one. I said I was going to talk about 1,000+ hours of talk. And that's an easy title because you can say anything underneath it. And I've certainly done more than 1,000+ hours of it in my long career at National Public Radio. But as a matter of fact, my topic tonight certainly is the humanities. After all, you are giving me dinner, and I know which side of the bread is buttered on. But really, it's about the importance of a liberal arts education. And yes. I had the feeling you would feel that way too. And I bet a bunch of you are academics and really feel that way. And whoever led those incredible children certainly believes it as well. A good education in liberal arts in school and also in life, because they have to be interconnected. And I hope you won't mind that I'm going to make it a bit personal as I go along, and it will give me some discomfort, not for you, I hope, but for me, because as a journalist, the last thing I get to do in my job is to talk about myself. The job of a journalist for decades, particularly in my anchoring days, for All Things Considered, then Weekend Edition on Sunday, was to talk about you, the men and women I report on, your doings, your concerns, your thinking, your anxieties and the things that you were creating. The point has always, for all of these years, this has changed these days as you get to hear everybody's opinion about everything. But in the days when I was really beginning, the point was never to talk about yourself or give your opinions, but to report on the rest of the world. That's reporting. It's what it is, or it should be. And one of my deeply held beliefs, and although many things have so changed, is that journalists really have to earn the right to say I. You don't just shove it into people's ears. You earn the right. You have to get their respect and get their interest and their curiosity and earn it through the work that you do. And then you have permission to talk about yourself, because it's not your main job. I feel it's rude to say it, but the eyes are really none of your business. We need to keep them to ourselves. Oh, there he goes again, really? You know what? When I need water, some lovely gentleman's going to come here, pick it up, and hand it to me. Aren't you? Anyway, I guess I've been at it long enough. It's more than 40 years now at NPR. As you heard, I'm a founding mother of the place. I guess I've got enough gray hairs to have earned the right to eye you this evening. So here goes. I want to talk about my life as a cultural reporter. It's a life, and it's been a very lucky one and a blessed one, spent in conversations with the most creative people in our society. Usually, they are not politicians. And I have to tell you, although I am fresh out of Washington this morning, I'm not discussing politics at all with you this evening. Yes! Thank you. I was afraid you would expect it, and I just want to tell you, sometimes at home, at dinners and with friends, we declare the evening a Trump-free zone so that we really can talk about other things. And so I'll declare this room a Trump-free zone for the rest of my time, just so we can be thinking about some other things for a while. But I've been lucky to talk with extraordinarily creative people, novelists, actors, artists, dancers, photographers, musicians, people who define the liberal arts. And by liberal arts, I mean that vast spectrum of studies in art, music, language, history, government, even math, science, social science, that give us a sense of the vast world in which we live, not just a narrow, specialized part of it, not just technical or vocational studies, which will give a better chance of nailing a job. That's important too, but it's not all there is. A broad liberal arts education makes you able to tackle any job that you are lucky enough to land with a depth and ability that a narrow specialization just will not provide. That's the end of that part of my sermon, although I may get a little religion afterwards as I go along. I'm a cultural reporter these days after decades of serving as a news hen. My task for most of my earliest years at NPR was to do daily journalism. 14 years, at all things considered, was news for me to do as the host. And it still really is the meat and potatoes of every day's broadcast. But throughout those HEC years, my dessert was always the humanities, the liberal arts. Every evening on the air, we would tell what had happened in the world that day. And on good days, which for me meant a slow news day, what happened to me was that I had had the chance to interview a writer, preferably someone who created fiction or poetry. On HEC, I tried to redefine the news, to remember William Carlos Williams, and to say that news was not just what was happening in Afghanistan or Syria or wherever or on Capitol Hill, that it's also news when Ann Tyler writes a new novel. And the chance to interview a novelist or a dramatist, a performer, as well as philosophers, folklorists, many of the other ists who make up the liberal arts, the chance to talk with them on a news program was what got me through all of those heavy news days when it just seemed relentless. I would choose 5 minutes with a performance artist over 4 hours with Paul Ryan any day of the week. And this is not a matter of politics. I promise you, it really isn't. It is simply that the creative mind has always held much more fascination for me than the political one, no matter who the politician and almost no matter who the artist is. I think the preference has something to do with compromise, but this is sort of a narrow little thing, and I'm not sure I really mean it, or I'm not sure I'm really nailing it, because artists usually tend to be against it. That is, they don't want to compromise. They want to do the painting their way. They want to do the dance their way. Many are in very collaborative media, like film or theater. But nonetheless, the vision of the creative person really exists without compromise. I admire and I often envy them for that. Then again, these politicians are usually against compromise too. That doesn't make them artistic particularly. There's nothing artistic about the way they resist compromise. For the last several decades, once I gave up anchoring, as a cultural correspondent, pretty much 100% of my time is spent with people in the arts and the humanities. And this is very much a matter of choice for me. It's the job that I asked for when I left All Things Considered, and I asked for again a few years after I put Weekend Edition Sunday on the air. Because I believe that if the world is to be saved, it is not the politicians who will save it. God knows we have evidence of that every single day, right now. It's the ones who make art and literature who will save us. The ones who study other cultures, who study their languages, their rituals, the people who learn to respect differences and to offer ideals and idealism. They are the ones who are going to piece sense together from these increasingly tattered times. This is why I believe so deeply in the importance of a liberal arts education, because it helps to create a full, well-rounded, well-informed human being, a human being who is capable of piecing sense together for the betterment of us all. This is not to put too huge a responsibility on their shoulders, but I think it's possible for them to do it. And also, the arts themselves, in particular, are just so important because they take you to a place where you usually don't hang out. They take you to some higher realm, some place that takes your mind off the difficulties of the day and clears your mind so that you can go back and face and solve and encounter the really rough things that are going on in this world. And we need the arts to do that for us, too. It's a kind of therapy, and I don't want to say it's only therapeutic, but it's something very powerful that it does. But my commitment to the study of liberal arts and the decision on my part to devote my working life to cultural reporting is also a commitment to community, to the things and creations that can bring us together, not keep us separate. It's a commitment to reporting often on things that last, not the titillations of yesterday's irrelevances. Most of my work as a journalist involves conducting interviews, and usually that means talking with strangers, which is the best and often the most difficult part of what I do. Talking to strangers and asking them questions, and then listening as creatively as I can to the answers. And that really has been my joyful impulse pretty much since I was a child, back in those days in the kitchen in Manhattan with the paint box in front of me and pieces of paper and the radio on, a little Bakelite radio that sat on the kitchen table. I did that kind of talking for years before I ever got near a microphone. High school friends of mine would have very mixed feelings about coming to my house for sleepovers because they knew I would keep them up all night asking them questions. And I've been lucky enough to have found a career in something that started out as an impulse, something I couldn't control. I always told our son Josh that if he was really lucky, he would find something that he loved to do and then figure out a way to get paid to do it. God bless him, you know, he followed my advice. That was a great surprise, but he did. He's an actor. And when he told me he wanted to do that, he told my husband and me, I said, well, don't be an actor, but if you might, I was encouraging him to marry a mortgage banker because I knew how difficult life was going to be for him. I said, but if you must be an actor, be a movie star, because then you can buy me my house in Malibu. Guess what? I live in Washington, D.C. still. But he's that anachronism that you think about. He is a working actor, And he has a wonderful family, 2 granddaughters, his are daughters, my grandchildren, and a life that he finds fulfilling. And people, but back to this whole idea of doing the journalism and asking the questions, they often ask a lot about what my favorite interview was, and that is such a hard question. I really can't answer it because I've done something like 20,000 or probably more by now over all of these years. But when pressed, I pick a conversation I taped a long time ago, 1977, with Joan Didion. And in publishing it, which I did in my second favorite book, which is out of print, so this is not self-promotion, I write about the practice of interviewing in general. And that very curious art form of broadcasting, you hear and you see it being done all the time, but those of us who do it don't talk very much about what's involved, the sort of the nuts and bolts of it, how it feels to do it. So I decided to write about it. I like to demystify our process. I think it's really important for you to understand what journalism takes and what the elements of it are. I like empowering listeners, and those of you who consume news need to know how we do it and why. So here's what I wrote. I need my specs for it, so give me a second here to write about a broadcast interview. When it's really good, it should sound as if the tape's been forgotten. It should sound absolutely natural, like a real-life conversation, but it never really is. There's nothing natural about it. You sit across the table from a complete stranger in a room lined with gray foam, egg carton-shaped acoustic padding. You wear a headset that lets you monitor the quality of the sound. You glance at a digital clock that is counting off elapsed time. You nod to a wall of glass behind which sits an audio engineer, possibly an editor and a producer, all of whom are taking notes so that they can cut the tape that you are making. And then you talk into pieces of electronic wizardry that will eventually carry your voice and the voice of your interviewee outside this equipment-laden room and into people's cars and kitchens. And now these days, earbuds. There's nothing natural at all about it. A conversation designed to be overheard. A broadcast interview forces the interviewer to listen with a kind of third ear, to make constant mental notes about follow-up, about when to change the subject when it's getting boring, about how to get a more concise response than the person who is wandering many different roads in front of you, about where the tape might be cut. And when it's done very well, a broadcast interview gives 12 million, well these days it's much more than that, it's something like 34 million listeners, the illusion that they are eavesdropping. So keep that in mind the next time you hear all of these people yammering away on the radio and also on television, maybe particularly on television. The photographer Richard Avedon said once that a portrait photography session involves what he called an unearned intimacy. I love that term because it precisely describes the exchange between myself and some of the people I interview. We sound intimate. We sound often as if we're very close and having an extremely natural chat. But it is a performance. Yes, some of the work of journalism is entertainment, and usually both sides are very aware of it. Curiously, when I asked Richard Avedon in an interview about that phrase, unearned intimacy, he too said it was like what we were doing, he and I, right then. We are the same, Susan, he said. We use people to express ourselves. There is no question you can't ask me in the interview in the next few minutes that I won't have to respond to. And then he said, if you came over to me at a party and asked me the kinds of questions you're asking me now, I would either turn away or I would say, "Are you an anchor lady? What is this?" Well, you know, Avedon said, this is not a normal conversation, Susan. Well, you know, he's right and he's wrong. I don't agree with Avedon that I use people to express myself. Here we go again with that I business. I talk with people and I try to help them express themselves. And I also disagree with him saying that ours was not a normal conversation, that if I came over at a party and I asked those questions, he would leave, or he'd say, "Are you an anchor lady? What is this?" I think that's wrong. And I spoke to many of you this evening, and you know, I think you've experienced what I'm talking about. I ask questions. I do it all the time. I ask many of you questions out in the lobby, and or as we met one another, I wanted to know where you were from and where you grew up, and tell me about your family and what do you do. It's just sort of an instinct that pours out of me. I do interview people at parties. I've done it all my life. I was talking about Joan Didion, and also about literature and about doing journalism. I've spent some time thinking about the differences between the two kinds of writing. As a journalist, somebody involved in the writing and presentation of facts. Do you remember that word? Facts. F-A-C-T-S. Yes, let's hear it for facts. I must say that I have a deep-seated envy of the people who can write fiction, and also an envy of those of you here today who are privileged and enlightened enough to teach it, and I bet there are several English teachers among you. It's a standing joke around the NPR newsroom to say, "Never let facts get in the way of a good story." Maybe that's why the term fake news has originated, I don't know. But it's a joke. It's a joke, I promise you. But you know, with good journalism, the facts always, very often, do get in the way. In news, we deal with the who, what, when, where, and how. But only in fiction can the writer really know the why. You know, it's 5 W's and an H, 4 W's and an H. Why explore by, and the fiction writer can do it by exploring morals and values, and that most important area of all, the one that is always the toughest to really get at, which is motivation. How come they did it? What was the reason? What was behind it? What did they really want? And Didion wrote once that what interests a great fiction writer is only rarely what interests, in the same situation, a reporter. I love this distinction. She says the novelist's interest in a situation wanes at that precise point when the reporter begins to consider herself competent, when the place is understood, when it begins to come clear, when the remarkable becomes commonplace and the course of a day can be predicted. Didion means that when the ambiguities are gone, the journalist's job is well done. But when the ambiguities are gone, the novelist loses interest, because novelists love poking around ambiguities and figuring things out. Saul Bellow also made a distinction between journalism and literature, and it's a distinction that I cherish as a broadcaster. It's something that he said in an interview in Esquire magazine years ago. This was years before CNN, which now lets us watch war and tragedy and disaster live in real time, sometimes while we're eating our dinner and the television is on. But back in the early 80s, Bellow was worrying about the way sensationalistic reporting was shifting our values and compressing our attention spans. Bellow said about journalism, about reporting, that although you are reading about it all the time, you can't find out what is happening in this world. You can't find out what's happening humanly. Unless you pass it through your own soul, you don't understand it. He thought that the deepest realities in our day come from art. And of course, I agree with that. I would add the humanities as well, the civilizing forces in our world that amplify understanding. I hope that the kind of journalism we practice at NPR is a civilizing force. It's been my life mission to make it so, to help to create a community of listeners, and I know you are one, who turn on their radios or now their various devices, their iPods, their clever little smart equipments, for something that they know they can't find anyplace else, to feel that they will be informed, educated, entertained by what they hear from us. There is such a public radio community now, people who sit next to one another on airplanes and find that they have something in common because they listen to NPR. There's an instant bond. My favorite encounters with listeners are when someone says they moved around all their lives. They went to high school, junior high in one place, and high school in another, college in another, graduate school someplace else, and the only thing that remained constant was NPR. I love that idea. And in a nation of strangers, in a nation of strangers, where moving is the status quo, knowing that radio can build community is most reassuring, that we have represented the sound of home. And I remember this personally from a time when my husband and I were driving through a part of New Mexico where we'd never been, and driving and looking, and the landscape kept changing, and we didn't have a sense of where we are, how did we get here, what are we doing here? And we had the radio on, and All Things Considered came on, and I heard my partner, Noah Adams' voice, and I felt I was at home. I felt grounded because there was Noah. Some years back, the great art historian Vincent Scully presented the annual Jefferson Lecture in the Humanities in Washington. It's an NEH lecture series, and it's quite an honor to be chosen for it. The Jefferson Lectureship is the top honor that the federal government gives to recognize distinguished work in the humanities. Scully's theme was the architecture of community, and he spoke about elements of the built environment which bring people together in new ways, just as these modern devices, cell phones, iPhones, Facebook, social media, are bringing us together now in new ways. Scully mentioned the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, for example. How many of you have seen that? Come to Washington. Good. I'm glad you've gone to see it. And if you haven't, make a point of it the next time you go there. It is surely the greatest piece of public sculpture created in our lifetimes. On the Mall in Washington, it's a black granite wall designed by Maya Lin, who was a 21-year-old architecture student at Yale. I think she was a student of Scully's there when she won the competition. I interviewed her some years ago. She was a listener and a fan of ours, and she told me that at Yale, working on this design, the way she figured out her angles was with mashed potatoes in the cafeteria. She would order mashed potatoes every meal, and she'd fool around with the knife, sort of making wedges, until she got an angle that was satisfying to her. Scully said, very seriously, though, that in her memorial, his words, "You see the possibility of a new community in America, made up of all the different kinds of people that we are, as all kinds of people, men, women, blacks, gays, move up and down in front of that surface, they are reflected in it and reach out and touch their dead and bring those veterans who thought that their country had cast them out back into the human community once more." Scully spoke about modern urbanism, how our cities were ruined in the 1960s when they became faceless canyons of glass boxes. He blamed it on Le Corbusier, who in the 1920s said how awful the old narrow streets were, where you have to look at the faces of other human beings all the time. So depressing, he said. Let's get rid of it. Let's clean it up. And the architects responded over the centuries by creating huge anonymous superblocks and cross highways so that nobody had to look at anybody anymore. I fear that that happens online now, too, as a matter of fact, with our new modern machinery. We all sit in front of screens now rather than encounter and have to deal with one another face to face. I thought of all of this when I paid attention for NPR to the work of two visual artists, Edward Hopper of America and Gustav Kayabat of France. I'll tell you some about him because he's less well known. Strand was the former US Poet Laureate, and he wrote a book on Hopper. Oh, it's a wonderful little book, which I think of every time I report on this or that exhibition of Hopper's work. Strand started out as an art major at Yale. Later, he turned to poetry, but he never lost his interest in the visual arts. And his little book on Hopper is full of wonderful observations. Strand says Hopper's painting looked like scenes that he saw as a child from the back seat of his parents' car. Incomplete stories, he said. Lives seen at street level. That woman leaning out the window, what is she looking for? Why is she there? That man staring into space, sitting at his gas station. Those people in the nighttime diner who look as if they're drinking coffee from hell. Hopper made that before the days of Starbucks. I don't know your opinion on Starbucks. You know that Hopper painting, it's called Nighthawks. You've seen it dozens of times, posters, mugs, greeting cards. Strand's idea of glimpsed lives, unfinished stories, connected for me with Scully's observations on the old view of cities when you had to look at the faces of other human beings. The urban places that we have created put those lives on upper floors now. We can't see them from the back of cars anymore. Edward Hopper painted what to me seemed very lonely, isolated people, although he denied that. But people who were not making connections, even though they lived at street level, surrounded by other lives. You think now how the tall buildings that went up after 1942, which was the year he painted Nighthawks, think how those buildings would have made his people feel even more alienated these days. And at the Arts Institute of Chicago, that wonderful museum which owns Hopper's Nighthawks, there was a terrific exhibition of the work of Gustav Caillebotte. Are you familiar with his name? It's spelled C-A-I-L-L-E-B-O-T-T-E. He was a 19th century urban impressionist, known to me initially because of his monumental painting of a man and a woman under gray umbrellas, walking down these massive cobblestone streets in Paris. It's called Paris Street, Rainy Day. He did it in 1877, and you may know it from coffee mugs and the same thing, and umbrellas, and the same things that you know Hopper from. He did not have a public life as a painter, which is really why he's only been rather recently, I'd say in the last 20 years or so, discovered is a silly word to use for somebody who's been around, but anyway, there it was. He did something like 500 pictures, but they stayed in the family. He never had exhibits of them, and so as a result, he didn't have to have exhibits. He didn't have to sell them because he was very wealthy. So as a result, he never became as well known as Monet or Renoir, but his wealth allowed him to become a great patron of the arts. And he bought up the works by his friends, Monet, Manet, Renoir, Degas, Cézanne. And those works became the heart of what is now the Musée d'Orsay in Paris, their Impressionist collection. In his own work, he was painting what was happening to Paris when Baron George Eugène Haussmann began turning it into a modern city, putting in those huge boulevards of Paris and iron bridges and rows of identical big apartment buildings. Now to us, it all looks very beautiful and very quaint, those embellished buildings of 19th century Paris. But back then, they were modern, and they stood for modernism. And Caillebotte, as an urban impressionist, was painting people as they were isolated and ignored by these new structures. His streets are enormous. His people, who are very prettily dressed in the style of their day, carrying their umbrellas, their parasols, wearing their long skirts, their top hats, they look lost on those streets. They are alone while sharing a common space. He paints a man leaning on a bridge rail and looking down, absolutely engulfed by huge girders. He is dwarfed by the bridge he's standing on, isolated just the way Hopper's people were in the 1930s and 50s. So these artists, Caillebotte and Hopper, We're painting what happens to community as modernity progresses, and also the longing for community that I think we feel from the moment we leave home and lose that first and most basic community of our birth. They painted the feeling of modern life at two very different but very similar times. In looking at their work, we are forced to feel, to connect with what's going on those canvases, to connect with our own apprehensions about change, with our own search for community, forced to feel, which is what great art always does. I think all of us long for community. You obviously have one here, several probably, and they're strong and they're wonderful. Some of us find it through religion, or through family, or neighborhood, or work, or yes, art. Art, the great book, the great piece of music, the play, the dance, painting, gives us the truths of our times. It synthesizes our feelings or our fears, our aspirations. It helps us to look at ourselves and our times in new ways. It helps us to express what's been inexpressible, beyond the language that we ourselves can create. And that's why I've chosen to spend this part of my life in journalism as a cultural correspondent, to try to track those expressions and to bring them to my listeners through the radio in their cars or the iPod bud in their ears. When the novelist Tobias Wolff got the PEN/Faulkner Award for fiction a few years ago, he spoke of the power of words. A power, he said, so great that one of the first things that any tyrant does is to bully writers into silence or to murder them. We've seen that happen in Russia recently, haven't we? Especially with journalists. Or to put them in camps, in jail, or force them into exile where their voices cannot be heard. But, Toby Wolff said, the true power belongs to them, and in the end, they will be heard. That's why, he said, we honor Ovid over Caesar, Solzhenitsyn over Stalin, Lorca over Franco, Shakespeare over any king. So it has always been, and so it will always be. So my thanks to Toby Wolff for putting into writing the kind of case I've been trying to make for the arts and the humanities as a radio journalist for all these years, and for doing it so forcefully and far more economically than I've been doing it. So my thanks to you too, first of all for inviting me and for letting me exercise my eye in public. It's lovely to meet you all. Thanks for your attention. Thank you.